Thought I'd sit on the floor today, but I really wanted to share this topic. It has come up lately in the last few months multiple times, and it's something that I would not have known, even kind of clinically. I mean, it makes sense, but I wouldn't have really thought about it until I realized this years ago that it had happened to me. It was this. Long before I understood what was happening in the relationship with my mom, when in adulthood she would go to hug me, I would find myself stiffening, and not really wanting her to hug me and feeling really guilty about that. Like, what's wrong with me? And she would say things like, why don't you ever hug me back? And meanwhile, I was very huggy and affectionate with my kids. And so I don't recall having a lot of affection, like physical affection from her. It wasn't like it was never there, but generally speaking. But the way I would feel in my body when she would go to hug me, I didn't understand at the time what was going on. But now, after doing this work and working with so many people who have parents who are on some level of immature, potentially undiagnosed or untreated narcissistic type qualities or tendencies, certainly borderline type qualities, I think especially where this can happen for sure if you never feel close. Like, it kind of makes sense. But what can feel weird is if there are parts of your relationship with a parent that feel good, where you feel like you have a good time or they help you. And that is really, I think, the difficult and complex nature often of having a parent who does struggle with something like borderline if it's untreated. Because it's not always bad. And that is why it makes the work of separating yourself and healing yourself and trying to create healthier relationships both with that parent ideally and other relationships, which are often the reflection of that really wounded attachment pattern you had, so difficult. So let's talk about disorganized attachment and the nature of physical affection when you have a primary caregiver like this. First of all, I want to just acknowledge that what you feel in your body and your nervous system in response to the hug or the attempt to be physical in some way is your body telling you that something doesn't match here, right? Now, we can all have different levels of comfort with physical affection for many reasons. So I'm not suggesting it's only this. There could be sensory issues, obviously neurological issues, like I'm basically saying. There can be all kinds of reasons why. But if you really had a very eggshell, emotionally immature, unsafe, on some level, spectrum parent, this is even more common. So it's like your body is like, you can't betray what you think you're trying to betray. I am reading this situation and I know that that's not safe for you. But until you understand what's going on, like I'm saying, you often feel like, what's wrong with me? You feel guilty about it. So why does this happen? Number one is because emotionally and or physically you were unsafe in childhood. And even though it may not have always been that way, at the end of the day, like I always say, if you are safe but unsafe, you're unsafe. At the end of the day, you become unsafe. And so your body knows that, even if you don't remember it in childhood. Oftentimes there were no boundaries with these kind of parents. So whether it was how they responded to us, how they treated us, what they shared, overshared, whatever it was. So in some way, the hugging thing is a way to kind of like try to hold a boundary, but not necessarily have the language for it. Number three, there's often a lot of enmeshment and parentification that has occurred. So one or both, where there's no emotional separation, you feel emotionally responsible, you feel like you're a parent in some way, you're a BFF, you're a therapist, whatever, and that is not a role you're supposed to have as a child. And so the hug, the physicalness kind of also matches that disintegration of the role you had in childhood and the role that you are now in with the parent. The next one is you often feel emotionally responsible for them and you resent it. So like when she'd go to hug me, kind of be on her terms, I think it was a way for me to be like, before I knew it up here, long before, I don't want you to have decisions over how you can respond to me. You don't just get to hug me when you want. Or I feel like I should be loving in some way that doesn't really match up to the experiences I had around the lack of safety. So that kind of plays out, that resentment can be present in that sort of stiffening we can feel during the hug or the physical affection. Or it could be words of verbal affection. It could be anything really, where they're giving you something and you on the surface should be like, oh, there's nothing wrong with this. But your body is saying, you can't betray the story that I know is true about your childhood. and or this parent. The next thing is they're often inconsistent in their affection. So maybe they loved you so much, you were so great, then you were the worst child. So once again, your body is like, this doesn't match up. The next one is it's often one-sided on the emotions of the parent. So going back to parentification and or enmeshment, it's really all about the parent. And you never felt seen and reciprocated. And so when they go to hug you or say things, maybe it's in a card or whatever, you're like, that's really about you. I never felt present in that. And my body is making it clear right now. The next one is you felt engulfed and or ignored. So very common in those who have difficulties with their emotional regulation and relational stability is that in some cases, this is like very common, especially with narcissistic parents, where they want to completely consume you and engulf you, or they ignore you, or they do both in different ways in different periods. And so that physical or affectionate dynamic doesn't tell this, once again, the truth of the story, and your body knows that. And lastly, one of the worst things I think is you felt trapped. I really believe that we feel trapped in childhood and helpless, but we have nowhere to go and no way to escape. And when a parent who is especially inconsistent, or even if they were, let's just say, classically straight narcissistic and you never felt mirrored, but you're supposed to get the right card at Christmas and say just enough. You can't just say happy, Merry Christmas. It has to be like dear mother or whatever. Or you just never, like I'm saying, you never felt it, but you're supposed to perform and deliver some kind of way that really denies the reality of the lack of authenticity and the true nature of what should have been vulnerability and emotional intimacy. That is also happening for you when you're feeling that way. And so if you have a parent that you love and adore, but you have, a complicated relationship with, but when they ask for things from you, when they want hugs from you, when they say things to you, you kind of bristle inside, but you feel bad about it. I would really encourage you to do some more work on understanding maybe why that's happening for you. If it especially relates to what you can at least identify as some complicated types of dynamics in your childhood. Now, what do you do about this? I think this is difficult. This is way bigger of a video that would require, because what we're really talking about is reconciling either the parent still alive, the relationship, the one you had, the one you'd like to have. And for many people, they come to therapy and they say, I have anxiety and I'm depressed, I'm hitting burnout, whatever it is. Or they're having physical health issues, mental health issues. But once we get into the unpacked parenting relationship, which is often this very kind of toxic, enmeshed, close, loving, dangerous, unsafe, threatening, suffocating relationship, that is years of therapy, I think, at a minimum. I'm not saying you have to be in therapy the whole time, but it's years of you not just doing the work to process your childhood, but how to deal with that parent in today's life. Like, is it about setting boundaries? Is it about trying to make repairs? Is it about trying to have a more surface relationship? Is it a I can't be in this relationship anymore dynamic? But oftentimes this is just scratching the surface. Like, if you're just realizing this, but you have not yet unpacked the story of your childhood, it is quite a significant thing to unpack. I'm not saying you have to live in the trauma of it all of the time, but it really does branch out and reach into all areas of your life, to how you parent, to your triggers, to of course, the partners you've chosen or you chose, where you have, work to do. And so while it may be on the surface, not surface, but whether maybe actual techniques around conversations, communication, boundary setting, relational dynamic switching, there's just as much, if not more, work to do internally. Because trying to reconcile, how did I go, for example, 40-something years, having that hug thing feel that way and not really fully understand how significant that trauma was. It's like, when I loved her so much. When I hated her so much. And as I've said, even in many videos a while ago, I was like 40-something years old in the closet having a complete meltdown with my best friend on the phone because my mom had accused me of things, called me horrible names. I mean, she's like in her 60s, pushing 70s maybe, and I'm 40-something. Like, I could have been a child back in my room again. And that was towards the end of when I really started to wake up, because things started happening towards my kids as they got older. And I think sometimes we will take so much, but when we watch it happening to our children, we're more likely to fight back and stick up for ourselves, really sticking up for them, but by proxy becoming advocates for ourselves too. The point is, it was so triggering. That had been going on. Frankly, it was worse in my adult life in many ways. It was bad in my childhood in a different way, but really bad in my adult life. And I didn't know that. I just knew that something about those hugs, I felt like a bad child because I wasn't loving her back. Like I felt bad. Which tells you the degree of denial and lack of awareness I had about also the trauma that I carried. And the trauma belongs to her. She was the parent. And so I didn't know that though. I thought it was me just being, once again, a bad, unloving, ungrateful child. All the things I'd been told by her and the things that had been reinforced throughout my childhood and certainly my adult life. So you were not the bad child. You did nothing wrong. And it's really important to start to unpack how that relationship dynamic, if you're like, yeah, I can relate to this kind of disorganized high highs and low lows parenting, how it is now showing up in your sense of self and in your life. And know that you didn't start that relationship, but it is really going to be on you to figure out how to navigate it moving forward, especially if that parent isn't willing to change. If they are willing to change, which sometimes they are, and they're open to feedback, even though it's hard, a lot of parents will do it, but a lot of parents won't. And that's where it becomes difficult. But I would suggest that no matter what you decide to do with them, you still have to do work on understanding your own little wounds, not little wounds, your own little child and the wounds that you carry. So thanks for being here. Please stay safe and well, and I'll see you soon. And don't forget to love on your inner child. Doing just like maybe one thing today that honors the wound, the desires, the care, whatever that you need. All right, stay safe. Thanks. Bye-bye.